Most men think respect is lost because of one big mistake. An argument, a failure, something obvious. That's rarely how it happens. Respect doesn't disappear loudly, it fades quietly. And by the time a man notices, the shift already happened long ago. The truth is, respect is not destroyed in a moment. It erodes in patterns, small behaviors, repeated signals, subtle emotional decisions that seem harmless at first. This is why so many men are confused. They're still showing up, still caring, still trying. Yet something feels different. Her tone changes. Her responses shorten. Her energy pulls back. And he can't explain why. Because the moment respect is lost is not when he stops trying. It's when his behavior quietly changes how he sees himself. Respect begins internally before it is ever reflected externally. A woman doesn't wake up and decide to lose respect. She responds to shifts in emotional positioning, and most men never notice those shifts happening inside them. Here's the first truth most people avoid. Respect is tied to self-regulation, not effort. Effort without self-regulation feels unstable. It feels unpredictable. It feels emotionally unsafe. Not dangerous, just unreliable. And that matters more than attraction. When a man starts over-explaining, it's not communication. It's a signal that he needs agreement to feel settled. When a man starts over-giving, it's not generosity, it's compensation. A compensation for internal uncertainty. When a man starts chasing clarity, he's no longer grounded. He's seeking emotional permission. And none of this looks dramatic from the outside. It looks like talking more, trying harder, being available, wanting reassurance. But emotionally, it feels like pressure. Not pressure to leave. Pressure to stabilize him. That's where respect begins to thin. Not because he's bad, not because he's weak, but because his emotional center has shifted outward. Respect follows men who are self-contained, not closed, not cold, but internally anchored. Here's what many men misunderstand. Being emotionally open does not mean being emotionally dependent. There is a difference between "I'm sharing my world with you" and "I need your response to regulate myself." The second one changes how you are perceived. Quietly. A woman feels it before she can explain it. She may not articulate it as loss of respect. She just feels less polarity, less tension, less presence. Something feels off. And once that internal perception changes, everything downstream changes too. Communication, attraction, boundaries. The man hasn't done something wrong. He simply stepped out of emotional authority without realizing it. And the most painful part? The harder he tries to fix it, the faster the shift completes. Because effort without grounding magnifies instability. This is why reassurance doesn't work. Why explanations fall flat. Why being good suddenly feels invisible. The respect wasn't taken. It was released. And it happens long before silence, distance, or conflict. In the next part, we'll break down the exact internal shifts that cause this change, and why most men unintentionally accelerate it while thinking they're doing the right thing. To understand how respect is lost, you have to stop looking at what a man does and start observing how he carries himself emotionally. Because respect doesn't respond to words. It responds to state. A man can say all the right things and still feel smaller. And that feeling is what changes the dynamic. One of the first internal shifts happens when a man starts monitoring her reactions too closely. He begins to notice tone, timing, short replies. Not casually, but emotionally. His attention moves outward. Instead of asking, "Is this aligned with who I am?" he starts asking, "What does this mean about how she feels?" That question alone changes everything, because now his emotional balance depends on feedback. And the moment a man needs feedback to feel stable, he has surrendered emotional authority, not deliberately, not consciously, but perceptibly. Another shift happens when certainty disappears. A grounded man doesn't rush to clarify. He observes first. But when certainty fades, he fills the space with explanation. He justifies his intentions, clarifies his tone, reframes his meaning, not because he's wrong, but because he wants emotional resolution. And resolution-seeking energy feels different from grounded communication. It feels urgent. Even if his voice is calm, this is where respect quietly thins. Because emotional urgency communicates something subtle. I'm not settled unless this is settled. And that creates imbalance. Here's a hard truth most people don't like. Respect requires emotional containment, not emotional distance, containment. The ability to feel without leaking, to care without chasing, to stay composed even when things are unclear. When a man loses that containment, his presence changes. He becomes responsive instead of steady, reactive instead of grounded. And no amount of kindness can compensate for that. Another internal shift happens when boundaries soften. Not spoken boundaries, emotional ones. He starts tolerating things that unsettle him to maintain harmony. He lets small discomforts slide. He adjusts his expectations quietly. And every time he does that, he teaches himself that peace comes from self-erasure. That inner negotiation is felt, not as weakness, but as lack of solidity. Respect does not attach to someone who negotiates themselves down. It attaches to those who remain intact even in uncertainty. This is why trying harder often backfires, because effort without self-alignment doesn't restore respect. It confirms imbalance. And the most painful part? From the man's perspective, he's being more patient, more understanding, more open. From the emotional perspective, he's becoming less centered. Respect doesn't disappear because love ends. It disappears when self-regulation collapses. In the final part, we'll talk about how respect is rebuilt. Not through pulling away as a tactic, but through restoring internal alignment that changes everything without a single demand. Now that we've seen how respect quietly fades, the question every man asks is simple. Can I get it back? The answer is yes. But not with chasing, explanations, or trying harder. Respect doesn't respond to effort. It responds to internal alignment. This means the man must first regain his emotional center. Not for her, not for anyone else, but for himself. Because respect is perceptible energy, not a checklist of behaviors. The first step is awareness. Observe where you have shifted outward. Notice where your emotional stability depends on feedback. Notice where you've tolerated discomfort just to keep the peace. This is not self-criticism, it's observation. The difference between understanding and blaming is what separates men who recover respect from those who never do. The second step is containment. Hold your emotions without seeking validation, care without needing reassurance, speak without needing agreement. This is the calm, steady energy that draws respect naturally. The third step is boundaries. Not as a tool to manipulate, but as a reflection of self-value. Clear boundaries signal internal authority, and authority commands respect quietly. Next, embrace selective presence. Be consistent, yes, but avoid overextending for approval. Do what aligns with your values, not with expected reactions. Then comes the most subtle, yet most powerful shift. Stop explaining internal states unnecessarily. The more you justify, the more imbalance you signal. Let calmness communicate integrity instead of words. And finally, patience. Respect may take time to restore. It grows naturally as energy realigns. No tactics, no manipulation, just presence, clarity, and emotional authority. Here's the final truth. Respect is never about control. It is a reflection of who you are. When you reclaim your internal authority, everything else, energy, interaction, attraction, follows effortlessly. Remember, effort without alignment doesn't work. Trying harder usually accelerates decline. Silence, calm, and emotional grounding rebuild what was lost. If a man can internalize this, he no longer worries about chasing, pleading, or over-explaining. He simply exists in alignment, and that is magnetic. And the irony? Once a man stops trying to earn respect externally, he often finds it returns naturally, stronger, deeper, and more enduring than before. This is the moment where presence replaces effort, authority replaces urgency, and calm replaces chaos. That is the path to real respect. Not imposed, not demanded, but quietly earned through alignment.